Hi everybody. This video will be a short reading guide to one of our texts, The Social Instinct by Professor Nichola Raihani. First, a little bit about Dr. Raihani. She completed her BA at Cambridge, 2003, did her postgraduate work in zoology, studying a bird species called the pied babbler in the Kalahari Desert. In general, Professor Raihani uses evolutionary science to study social behavior in animal species like birds and fish, and also in humans. She was appointed professor of evolution and behavior at University College London. She's a winner of several prizes, including the Leverhulme Prize in Psychology, and was elected Fellow of the Royal Society of Biology in 2019. Social Instinct is her first book. And she begins really at the beginning. You'll see after the short introductory chapter, pages 11 to 13 gives a very brisk and interesting overview of the evolution of life on the planet. And I want to draw your attention to this quote. A common theme permeates the major evolutionary transitions. Each one involved smaller units locking themselves away inside a larger one. This expansive view of life on Earth therefore reveals a history of partnerships, of singletons, meaning single creatures, individuals, becoming teams and working toward collective goals. The history of life is a history of cooperation. On pages 17 to 24, she goes a little bit more detail about how evolution works, how natural selection works, and introduces us to something called the selfish gene theory. And there's a bit of a mystery here. Given that our genes are selfish in the sense that their sole raison d'etre is to reproduce themselves, why is there so much collaboration? And seemingly individuals will sacrifice themselves, including all of their genes, for the sake of the group. How can we explain this? And so a key idea that she presents to us is the idea that evolution can act at the level of what she calls a superorganism. And we can think of an ant colony, a colony of ants, as a kind of a superorganism. So each ant is an organism, and the colony itself can survive under certain conditions that might require sacrifices of the individual ants. She talks about ant suicide to protect the colony. And the question is, should we think of human societies as a superorganism or not? And she gives us some reasons why we might not think of human groups as superorganisms. And to take us through what makes human beings unique, she then tells us sort of evolutionary story and how our form of cooperation developed in a very different way than ants and other social species. In chapter 14, she brings us to the evolution of our instinct for fairness. Fairness is something universal to all human societies, this instinct to not cheat, to treat each other fairly, which is, argues Professor Raihani, the basis for all human teamwork. And she compares this instinct for fairness and teamwork with the behavior of chimpanzees. Of course, chimpanzees live together. They're a social species, but they exhibit much different forms of collaboration and therefore much higher forms of selfishness than Homo sapiens. And she explains a little bit of how that works. The following chapter, called Mutiny, examines basically the rise of politics, the model of social organization in which the strongest male member of the society dominates everybody else and basically sets the rules for everybody. And that this is a common model in other primate species, not all primate species, but some. And then she examines coalitions and how coalitions can form that can overthrow the dominant male in a group of humans, including other animals. And she uses the example of pirates on the ocean. The following chapter, Here Be Dragons, looks at the puzzling mystery of paranoia and why we seem to be afraid of things that aren't really there. And she argues that paranoia might actually, this is based on her empirical evidence might actually be useful at the level of the group, that our beliefs, including our imaginary beliefs, act as social signals, and how this is an important part of human bonding at the large scale. The following chapter, Take Back Control, returns to this question of politics, of how humans organize power in their societies. And she draws upon the work of an anthropologist named Christopher Boehm to present the argument that early human societies may have switched, in some cases switched very suddenly, from the model of the strongest male in the group dominated all the others to an egalitarian model in which the weak teamed up to dominate the strong. And that this, for the most of the history of our species, the last 100 to 200,000 years, was a very, very common model of human organization, where the collective dominated the strongest individuals. But then, as we know, in the last several thousand years, since the beginning of agriculture, many societies have switched back and are now dominated by one or a few powerful individuals, generally men. And so she tells the story of how that happened, how it may have happened. And then finally, chapter 18, Victims of Cooperation, she gets us to think about who we are loyal to. And she makes the maybe counterintuitive argument that corruption, bribery, things that we think of as bad for society, are also forms of collaboration, require groups to work together. And they're based on a kind of a loyalty, but a loyalty at a lower level of society, loyalty to your clan or your family above the rules that bind the whole society. And she calls these circles of moral regard, meaning who we feel loyal to help or to serve, or whose rules we are willing to follow. And she shows studies that compare what are called collectivist cultures, in which family level loyalty is the most important, and in which often rules at the level of society are not followed, to more universalist societies in which the family bonds of morality are slightly weaker, in some cases much weaker, and the large-scale bonds of following laws, paying taxes, helping strangers is much stronger. And she relates the story of the lost wallet experiment. Different societies show different likelihoods of returning a random lost wallet found on the street. And so she finishes her book by asking this big question, which is, how can we generate or engineer cooperation at the international and even at the global level for our biggest problems? And she concludes the book by presenting the idea of a Nobel laureate Elinor Ostrom, which you may have heard of, called Think Global and Act Local. And she explains how we need to use the evolutionary history of cooperation in human beings and harness our instincts that are very, very ancient from the bottom up if we want to create very large-scale cooperation. And so this is The Social Instinct by Nichola Raihani. I really hope you enjoy reading this book, and happy reading.